Hey, hello, everyone. Welcome to Idea Chat Central New York. I'm Billy, and I'll be your host this week. So for those of you joining us for the first time today, Idea Chat is a webcast based at Syracuse University and hosted here by the RVD Idea program. We sit down once a month with inspiring members of the entrepreneurial community to talk about their work and experiences. In the past, we've covered topics related to tech, design, media, and more. This week, we'll be talking about the do's and don'ts of venture funding. Before we bring on our guests, I want to invite you all to follow along with us on Twitter by using the hashtag IdeaChatCNY, and send us your comments and questions that way. We'll be taking comments from the audience later. And today, we'll be talking with Doug Crescenzi and Mitch Patterson. Doug is a co-founder and CEO of Lono, a smart home solution for managing sprinkler and watering systems. In the past, Doug has also led the internal products accelerator at Rain Media in New York City. Mitch is an independent venture connector who works with an array of talent in the Central New York area. Doug and Mitch are also the co-founders of Hack Upstate, where they work together to help grow the Central New York tech community. So together, these two have a lot to share regarding the journey of starting a business and when comes the right time to seek funding. So without further ado, let's get these two fine gentlemen on here. Greetings, both of you.
What's up, buddy? Thanks, man. Appreciate you having us.
Yeah, totally. So, I guess to start it off, could both of you just tell us a little bit about yourselves? I kind of gave a summary, but if you want to elaborate a little more, maybe talk more about the work you've done together and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. Mitch, you wanna go first?
Yeah, sure. My name is Mitchell Patterson. I have helped set up and create and work on a bunch of entrepreneurial startup kind of programs in the upstate and downstate region. Things like Startup Weekend. I helped manage the Tech Garden and a small $5 million seed fund called Grants for Growth. And over the past 2 years, I believe now, been working on sort of a side project with a friend of mine who's also on here, Doug, called Hack Upstate, which has really been sort of something that started between two of us kind of seeing what existed in upstate New York with regards to tech talent. And over the past 2 years, we've seen, I think, over 700 participants and over 100 different developed programs completely made by programmers in the upstate region.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and so on my end, come from a computer science background, got my bachelor's from Syracuse in '06, and then went on to the iSchool and got my master's in 2008 with a focus in cybersecurity. Made my way down to DC for about 3 or 4 years. I was working at a company called MITRE, which is essentially a federally funded think tank. And so it was good work, it was fun work, it was challenging work, and I was there for about 3 or 4 years, but it was too big. It was too big, too much red tape, but a little too bureaucratic for me. And so I thought pursuing a PhD was the answer. So in the fall of 2011, I started my PhD at the iSchool at Syracuse. Started out really well. Grades were good. Faculty are great there, of course. But in the middle of February of 2012, I had a silly idea for a mobile application. So consequently, I stopped going to class and started to build it and started a company around it, which failed shortly thereafter. But it exposed me to the whole entrepreneurial world and just got me really, really stoked about it. So fast forward a few years later, we started a company called Lono, which Billy alluded to is an outdoor smart home company. And so what I mean by that is we're assembling a portfolio of outdoor, intelligent, interconnected devices which give homeowners the control and intelligence they need to make managing their homes easier and more efficient. And so our first product, and I'm sure we'll get to this a little bit, but our first product is called Lono. It's an intelligent Wi-Fi enabled sprinkler controller. It's very much like Nest for sprinklers. So we can talk about that as much as you want.
Yeah, totally. So thanks both for detailed background. And as I alluded to a little bit in the introduction, you guys have done a lot of different stuff, all kind of centered around tech and entrepreneurship, but different cities, different ventures. And so, the main theme of this chat kind of centers around funding and growth of a small company. So to start that off, you both talked about having worked on different startups, and venture capital and this idea of raising funds has become a much more vocal and prevalent part of that process in recent years. So I guess, how would you both define venture capital, and what role do you see it playing for interested companies?
Doug, you want to go first this time?
Sure. So venture capital is obviously it's a fund comprised of limited partners that come to the table and they want to get involved in a fund that ultimately a managing partner leads in terms of which investments are made and which investments aren't. So from my perspective right now, being an entrepreneur, constantly communicating with venture capitalists, whether it be through email or phone or face-to-face meetings, that capital is there to help folks like us scale our companies as quickly as possible. So in the context of Lono right now, we're trying to raise a round where we can set aside those funds to scale our engineering team. So Mitch, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, I mean, coming at it from typically on the investment side, I think venture capital is usually capital that companies in an early stage, usually really trying to create an industry or working in an industry where they don't have a lot of revenue, a lot of customers, seek out capital that can provide two values. One is give them money to hire staff and scale the idea, and two, also typically bring in some other individuals and some folks that can help build the network and grow the product. I mean, typically I think of venture capital as a tool to scale an idea to a company.
Cool. And, venture capital also carries risk, though. You're asking to give up a little bit of ownership for your company, or a lot, depending on the situation, in return for this funding. So could you talk a little bit more about the risks? Mitch, you've worked in the funding process, and Doug, I'm sure risk is on your mind at all times when you're looking at these the trade-offs in raising funds for your company.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to the investor, I mean, like I said before, you're investing in a company that really is working on an idea and trying to make it into something more than that. And at the same time, the company, a lot of times I hear from folks say, well, I'm not going to raise capital because I can, slowly build the company and start bringing in revenue and grow the company slowly and keep 100% equity. And my response typically to that is that by bringing in capital, you're able to move a lot faster and bring in a lot more resources that you're not going to have simply by trying to grow it organically.
Yeah, and Billy, it's funny. So, speaking, wearing the entrepreneur hat, venture capital. The reality is, venture capital is expensive, right? So when you're raising VC, you're giving up equity in your company, and the notion of giving up equity it's a part of the startup world, right? It's just a given, but we're putting in all this time and effort into these ventures and our product and our team. So it's important that people realize that raising VC dollars is not necessarily, it's not necessarily this tremendous win that a lot of people, particularly TechCrunch, make it out to be. Yes, it's good. Yes, it's a necessity. But you have to give up a lot. You have to give up equity in this thing that you're pumping all your blood, sweat, and energy into. And that's expensive, right? Like, that's almost more than the dollars that you're raising in some context. So there is certainly risk involved in raising money, taking into account who you're raising money from, that whole due diligence process that the VCs themselves go through as well. And taking into account, okay, sure, this VC or this entity or this institutional capital is introducing capital to our company that we can use to help scale. But a more important component that I would contend is, what strategic value is coming from raising this money? Are these VCs connected to other folks in your industry that they can help you? Can they help you identify other talent to hire and bring onto your team? In our case, can they help us with manufacturing? Can they help us optimize our bill of materials? Can they help us with supply chain? So there's more to ask yourself than simply, I'm trying to raise X number of dollars at X valuation. It's more so to what extent does strategy come into play, and to what extent can this venture capital entity or entities play a role in helping you scale your company as well.
Those are all super valuable points. Thanks a lot for sharing. And I think it transitions well into another question that I have, which kind of goes into, venture capital is one option, but there are others. What are some other options you think might be available when considering this balance of risk and benefit and what it adds to your portfolio? And you feel free to bring in examples either from your work on Hack Upstate, Lono, other experiences. The more the merrier.
Sure. Mitch, can I take this one first?
Yeah, go for it, man.
Cool. So it's funny, with Lono, we kind of did things backwards. We raised a round of funding last year it was institutional dollars. It came from a VC, and that was our first raise. And that's somewhat atypical today. More often than not, you'll see folks go through like a family and friends round, which is typically a convertible note, which gives an entrepreneur the opportunity to prolong putting a valuation on their company, and instead letting them create more value with that company and holding off until that round converts into equity. So it kind of mitigates some risk for the entrepreneur. So conversely, again, we raised institutional capital first because it strategically made sense to us based on who we were raising money from. But now we're kind of in the process of raising what's known as a bridge round, which is a convertible note round. So in this round, it's unlikely that we'll bring on any institutional capital. It's primarily composed of angel investors here in New York, a few in Utah, and then a few family and friends are getting involved in this round as well. And then kind of moving outside of the VC world, of course, with a business like Hack Upstate, which is client services driven, there's opportunities to generate revenue from satisfying requirements that a particular client might have, whether it be a short-term or long-term project, or raising sponsorship dollars, which we've had success with, and we're fortunate to be working with folks like Center State CEO who have helped us on that front as well. But there's certainly plenty of avenues when it comes to raising money, but what matters most is like, what are your objectives? Are you in this to be a service-driven company because it's a lifestyle business, and you just want to have your own little company, but you're not looking to scale it into a multi-million-dollar business? Or on the other side of the spectrum, are you building a product that you're looking to scale and grow really, really fast? And in that case, of course, VC is the pragmatic and practical approach.
Gotcha. Anything to add there, Mitch?
Yeah, I mean, I think venture capital includes too many things that aren't actually venture capital. When I think venture capital, I think of an institutional investor. There's other routes like accelerator programs, incubation programs, venture development funds, stuff like that. And on top of it, I also think it's important. I mean, Doug hit on it perfectly. Sometimes you're building something that's more of a lifestyle business and isn't a high growth company. In those instances, one, the returns aren't going to be enough, and for a venture capitalist to actually be interested. And at the same time, a lot of times when you're taking institutional capital, you have to take that with the understanding that the exit strategy has now become something that can either sell the company or become an IPO. So you need to be okay with the fact that you're not going to be doing this company now for 20 years because the likelihood of an IPO is so unlikely. So understanding that, doing it that way, you're setting yourself down a path of exiting the company at some point.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable point that a lot of people don't realize, is that there are a lot of long-term consequences of that kind of decision to accept that funding. So I'm going to transition focus a little bit, and we have some questions coming in regarding your work with Hack Upstate. But before I take that, I would be interested for you guys to explain a little bit about Hack Upstate. And you're both working on other stuff full time in your own right, and then you get together and you bring Hack Upstate together. So how did that come about, and how does it actually relate to what you do today? Whether you're working in the funding industry or you're the CEO of your own startup.
Doug, you do much better explaining this.
Thanks, man. So Hack Upstate is a passion project of ours that I can tell you I love being a part of and I love working on, and I'm fortunate to work with great folks like yourself, Billy, and Mitch and Tom. And so with Hack Upstate, ultimately, I think, Mitch, we were getting beers 2 years ago, right around the holiday time, and we just noticed this tremendous void in bringing together upstate New York tech talent. And it was apparent to us, Mitch, from his experiences with startup weekends and traveling upstate New York, and myself, having grown up in Syracuse and done a number of technical things, whether it be cybersecurity conferences or whatnot. But we realized that there's tons and tons of tech talent scattered throughout upstate New York. Tremendous tech talent, some of the best in the country. But no one was doing anything to kind of bring those folks together. Instead, they kind of operate in their own smaller, siloed communities. So Mitch and I, we wanted to address that problem. We wanted to bring these folks together, help facilitate collaboration amongst themselves, and in some cases help align them with business opportunities, whether it was helping them start their own companies or aligning them with existing companies where they were looking for full-time employment. So we started it 2 years ago, and our hypothesis was, well, what better opportunity to bring folks together like this than a hackathon? Get some food, get some beer, get some soda, get some snacks, some fruit, and some healthy food in there as well. But bring these folks together, let them hack and collaborate on stuff for 24 hours, and then see what they come up with. And I think one decision we made early on was, this was not about starting a business. Hack Upstate was very much about celebrating technology, celebrating the folks behind the technology, and encouraging them to collaborate. And we've come to realize that this mission is really resonating with people, right? This mission to unite and facilitate collaboration among upstate New York's tech community, and we're just fortunate to be a part of it.
Cool stuff. Thanks for sharing. You have anything to add there, Mitch, or do you think he's covered the gamut?
No. I mean, the thing I'm most happy about is that kind of something that really did start over, two guys having a few beers at Empire, has grown into involvement from a lot of the tech companies all throughout upstate New York, the colleges, the universities, even major corporations have sort of reached out and offered support. And it's really helped start to bring together a community of engineers from, even all over the Northeast, with folks coming in from New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. And the one coming up in April, actually, I even saw a few people signed up from Toronto.
Cool. That sounds really cool, where it's going to become an international event.
Yeah.
That actually transitions well into one of the first questions from our audience, coming from Tom Charles, which kind of touches upon points you made and also a point Doug made. So Doug spoke to how this wasn't about starting a business, it's about coming together and collaborating. So Tom asks, what do you guys think about how often people come to hackathons and don't necessarily work on the most serious projects, things that would turn into products, because that they wouldn't necessarily continue them afterwards? And also, I want to build out that question and ask, speaking to your point, Mitch, you have all these people, universities, companies coming in and working together, yet it's often not for a very business-oriented end. So where do you see that kind of balance and that connection?
I mean, I've noticed, and I will, in full disclosure, say that I'm not a programmer, but a lot of the participants come and they have, jobs, well-paying jobs, and a lot of them use this as an opportunity to work on passion projects, to develop new skills, and even we learned in the very beginning that the biggest prize of all is more or less impressing their peers with what they're able to do. Yeah. And it's been really cool, where it's really just a bunch of talented individuals coming together, showing off, the skills of the future, and that's the sole purpose. To answer the second question, I do think that it's become important. Because a lot of times we had done startup weekends and we had done a lot of other events focused on entrepreneurship, and IT tech apps are really a lot of what's developed. But what would happen is we'd have 150 participants, and 140 of them would be people with an idea. 8 of them would be a programmer, and 2 of them would be a designer. So it's really been a good way to identify and collaborate with and build a community of designers and developers and engineers in upstate New York that I think previously didn't have a place to go.
That's great. I think it's a fantastic mission, and from what I've seen being involved, it's definitely doing well to fulfill that need in the area. Do you have anything to add there, Doug, at all?
Yeah, one thing I was going to touch on was, with engineering, with development, with writing code, it's all about, practicing and, acting as a practitioner, right? Applying what you're learning and applying your skill sets. Whereas I'd contend too often in academic context, everything is about being taught how to think, or, that perception, as opposed to simply just doing, making mistakes, and learning along the way. I feel like with Hack Upstate, we're in a position where we can celebrate applying skill sets, and something that's really fascinating to see with the talent that comes into the and participates is these folks are coming with a multitude of different programming backgrounds, countless frameworks, countless different languages, and then it's so fascinating to see these folks interact and collaborate, and in many cases they'll commence development upon a project at Hack Upstate using a language they didn't tried before. And that's what it's all about, right? Trying new things, making mistakes, breaking things, and learning along the way. And again, I think there's tremendous value in this notion of applied learning. And unfortunately, I don't really see it in conventional academic context today.
What a very entrepreneurial statement. So we have another question regarding Hack Upstate coming in from D. Cater on Twitter. And she asks, what are your advice for folks who want to get involved in Hack Upstate or a similar event, but they're not developers? And maybe, Mitch, you could speak a little bit to that specifically, since you yourself have said you're not a developer, but you have founded this event that has seen a lot of success.
Yeah, one thing I've used it is an opportunity to learn sort of how, the other side of the table thinks. Really to sit down and spend time with developers and designers and think about how they go about constructing their ideas. And it serves as an educational tool for myself, so that when I evaluate tech companies, or I evaluate or even just hear ideas, understanding the actual architecture that goes behind the technology is just as important as understanding the market.
Gotcha. That's a great answer. Doug?
Yeah, so one thing I've been super excited about with Hack Upstate, and it was something I didn't foresee when we first started it, was how many folks without technical backgrounds, without STEM backgrounds, come to the event, feel welcome, join a team, participate and collaborate throughout, and then they have the exposure to it and what it's all about. And what's been so cool to see is that this program or this event, or the participants in the community have just extended open arms to these folks. And and personally, I've met a number of folks that have just got involved, and they're coming from literature backgrounds, or there was a girl a couple Hack Upstates ago. I think she was actually on one of the teams that got second place, but I think she was pursuing a philosophy degree. Huh. And so it's just been so cool for these folks these diverse backgrounds coming together. And if anything, it's helping from a creative standpoint. And we want to ensure that we continue to focus on diversifying and bringing more folks to the table that don't necessarily come with that tech foundation, but can pick up some of it while they're there and then ride with it into the next event 6 months later.
Cool. So we have a question coming in from the Tech Garden here in Syracuse, New York, that is going to transition us back a little bit to some discussion about venture funding. So the Tech Garden asks, how do you recommend innovators and people with ideas reach out to VCs? Is there a special process? How does one find these resources?
You want me to go first, Mitch?
Yeah. Go, tell the Lono story. I think that could be.
So, typically, I think when you're reaching out to VCs, whether it be through email or just trying to get connected, they're not going to talk to you until you have some traction there, right? Until you have at least something kind of sort of out there, whether it's a Kickstarter campaign, whether it's a prototype, whether you have something where users are on it and they're giving you feedback. But you kind of have to get to that phase first, right? You're not going to raise venture dollars until you put in a little time, heart, and energy into what you want to pursue, and then it makes more sense to start to engage in those conversations. Mm-hmm. At least in the context of Lono, it's been fascinating. The different channels in which you kind of get in touch with these folks. Some of it is inbound. Some VCs will reach out, whether it's through email or through a mutual connection. A lot of it's outbound, right? Whether it's just blind emailing folks, or working with your existing investors or angel investors to kind of connect you with some other VC folks. And then here's an interesting strategy that I found to work really well. So you obviously want to focus on the space, right? And you don't want to pursue VC dollars from a VC whose investment thesis is totally unrelated to your product and what you're doing. Yeah. So what I would do is, of course, we're home automation, we're Internet of Things with Lono. I would reach out to other folks, other entrepreneurs at other home automation and consumer electronics and IoT product companies that were startups that had either just raised money or were on the verge of raising money and in the midst of raising a round. And I would just reach out to these guys, and more often than not, people in this community are tremendously altruistic and willing to connect with them 5-10 minutes. If we hit it off, we have a conversation there, we have a dialogue, we're exchanging notes, we're sharing information. Next thing you know, without explicitly asking, those conversations often can lead to connections with interested investors or potentially interested investors in this space that they were already talking with. So I would really encourage folks to align themselves with other entrepreneurs doing not necessarily the same thing, of course, but in adjacent spaces, doing similar things, because you're all going to be talking to the same, or trying to talk with the same investors and trying to tap into that same cash pool.
Yeah. I think it's all about the community is what you're kind of getting to there.
Dude.
Really having the right connections and knowing the people that are relevant to you will get you a long way.
Yeah, people are everything, and you're not going to start with a bunch of connections to start with, but it's funny how fast it spreads. So you start small, you're reaching out to people, you include them on your monthly updates, your monthly emails, telling them progress, giving them the opportunity to kind of connect the dots, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then next thing you know, they're connecting you to 2 other guys in Sacramento that could be interested in angel investors. It's kind of you commit to it, right? You're not just going to stumble into VC dollars. You kind of have to strategically align your pieces so that you're in a position to raise the money you need to when you're ready. So I'm kind of doing that right now. I know right now I don't want venture capital at this stage. We have some inbound interest, and it's just not where we're at. That said, I'll engage with these folks. I'll share information with them. I'll include them on our monthly updates. And in 8 to 9 months from now, or maybe a little bit sooner, when we're looking to raise that next round, they'll have the whole story. They'll have the different. They'll have insight into our progress. Did we hit our milestones? What mistakes did we make? Did we learn from those mistakes? And then we're not starting from scratch, right? We're just so much better positioned to have those conversations about raising money, what valuation, yada, 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 what strategic value you offer, what are you going to do with this money? They already know that. So you have to go at it strategically as opposed to tactically.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. Mitch, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that, some of my friends and mentors who have a lot of capital under their management get a lot of cold calls. They get a lot of emails. They have people kind of like showing up at their office, and I don't think that's typically the best way to get to them. I think referrals and kind of, as Doug said, slowly building the community in your network is the key. Entrepreneurs tend to be the best referral sources to other successful entrepreneurs, in my opinion. And it's the community's not that big. So, if you start spending time and getting to know the right people, and you're not, trying to sell them like a used car salesman every 5 minutes on your idea, you'll quickly become immersed in it and meet the right people, and doors will open.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that, as I was saying earlier, your network is very important, especially if you want to go the entrepreneurial route. We could probably have a whole idea chat just centered on that one topic alone.
Mm-hmm. And something I would just add, Billy, is like the reality is, and you know this, I'm sure, but the reality is you're going to hear no, all the time, right? You're going to hear no 9 times for every 1 time that someone says yes. And so there's kind of this, persistence is important, but I mean, you obviously need to know when to take a step back and appreciate and respect that team's decision. That said, there's nothing to say you can't keep them informed of what you're doing, because in 6 months from now, an investment in your company might make perfect sense to them, right? So just that kind of persistence without being a jerk is probably something I would contend is important.
Yeah, I think that also transitions well into one last question I want to throw to both of you. Now, I'll warn you that it's kind of an impossible question, but I still want to hear your thoughts on it. And that is, when is the, quote, right time to pursue funding for a company? And maybe maybe a better way of saying that is, when are the signs that it might be time to start looking for funding? And I think that ties well to your ideas of persistence, and feel free to share thoughts, even if they are a bit ambiguous.
Yeah, I mean, getting the ball rolling and starting to talk to people is important. And I actually think that you should, if you think at some point you want to do this, you should start building that network and becoming part of the venture ecosystem, because at some point in time, coming back to them and utilizing that network and having a pre-established relationship will make things a lot easier. With regards to when I have my startup, I think you should be at a certain point where you are starting to get traction. You have somewhat of a product. Revenue, I don't think, is a necessity for institutional venture capital, but it helps. Identify who your market is, what the market size is. One of the easiest tricks to do when you do that is to look at how many customers there are and how much you would charge them, and that kind of gives you an idea for, the valuation of your company. But, be able to answer those questions, because if you come in the door and you can't answer them, you're not going to get a second meeting.
Yeah.
So, obviously it's totally context dependent, and like you said, there's no right or wrong answer to it. My perspective is that the longer you can go without raising institutional capital and giving up equity, the better off you are. So it might require that you get a little bit more creative with how you facilitate gaining traction, or how you go about building your product out, and perhaps you just have like a really crude prototype that you're shopping around like crazy. But in any event, I think there's a lot of value in not raising money as quick as TechCrunch would lead you to believe. Because, again, this is your company, and your equity and your blood and your sweat that you're pouring 90 plus hours a week into is tremendously valuable, right? And so to give it up just for a sum of cash, you just have to be careful, and there's no need to rush it. And here's the thing too, if you find that after a few months of hustling and grinding, and perhaps you've made modest progress, or perhaps you hadn't, you have more visibility into to what extent this idea or this product opportunity you're pursuing is actually worth pursuing. So yeah, I wouldn't be in a rush to try to raise VC dollars. When you need them, it'll be pretty conspicuous, right? But so long as you can kind of, it's timing, right? And of course, everything's dependent upon circumstance, but you can create a lot of value yourself without that VC money in the bank.
Yeah. So I think 2 big takeaways is know your stuff through and through, and don't rush it. So one last question from the audience before we wrap up, and this one's a little more fun. I'm sure you guys will have a lot of choices to choose from, but from Sarah Rose, she asks, what is your favorite project that's come out of Hack Upstate after all these years?
This is actually one by one of our participants that's come to every one. And I'm not sure if it was the first or second one. Some of you guys might know Jake Beard. And in one of them, he created this interesting tool where he discovered the Airstream trailers. I didn't know what an Airstream trailer was. It's those old silver trailers that people used to have back in the 50s and 60s. And he found out that in the middle of the country, they're not worth anything, but in the coast, they're worth a lot. So he created a tool that could track a journey where you could drive to the middle of the country, purchase a trailer, and then sell it on the coast, and actually travel the country while selling these trailers and having the profits you make pay for your travel.
That is fantastic. I want to use that tool right now and plan myself.
I mean, obviously not a huge practical tool, but it just, you know, it was creativity. It was really neat just how sort of like it was an interesting way to spend your weekend.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I love that hack too. I thought that was great. And you know, speaking of Jake Beard, I'm incredibly fortunate to be collaborating with him now. You know, we're working together, which is really exciting. So I think with my favorite hack, and there's been so many good ones, you know, some of which are, you know, could very well be businesses, and some of which are just simply for fun and creative. And I think my favorite kind of falls in that fun, creative side. So I remember Keske came. It might have been hack up say 2 or 3, but he came with like a toothbrush, a motor, and an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi. I can't remember. But his anecdote was he remembered being a kid and how he was terrible about brushing his teeth, and you know, it was just he hated it. And he had just had a daughter recently, and so he wanted to make a game for her to get her excited and incentivize her to brush her teeth. And so he made this awesome little game where you could actually scrub back and forth and view it on the screen as to how you were performing with brushing your teeth. And it was really funny. It was really clever. It got a bunch of laughs at the event. And he just did a tremendous job with it. And his presentation was great. You know, Keske is such a funny guy, and he's such a smart dude. I think that was probably my favorite one to date.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing. Both really entertaining. I want to use that Airstream tool. But so that's really all the time we have. Again, thank you both for joining us and talking about everything from fun hacks to the ins and outs of venture capital. And before we go, do either of you have any last points you want to share with the folks viewing this now or later?
The only thing I'd say is, you know, come check out the next Hack Upstate. It's April 11th and 12th at the Tech Card.
In Syracuse, New York. Sounds good. For anybody local, please join us.
For sure. And I would just say that Hack Upstate, it's been a tremendous privilege. You know, I'm so excited to be a part of it. I'm so excited to, you know, meet all of these awesome people within the community, and, you know, Billy, to have an opportunity to work with folks like yourself and Tom. I mean, that's a privilege for us. So, you know, we're extremely fortunate to have this opportunity to all work together and, you know, to be a part of this. So I would just say thank you to everybody.
Great. Well, again, thank you both for joining us. For those watching, you can follow Doug via @DougieBuckets on Twitter, and you can visit lono.io to learn more about his company, and you can follow Mitch via Upstate VC on Twitter. And finally, you can continue the conversation on Twitter with the hashtag IdeaChatCNY, or follow IdeaQs on Twitter for the latest news and entrepreneurial events in the Central New York area. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.